Nifty looking decent, 15 points higher, 7,206. Mayuresh Joshi of Angel Broking is now joining us this afternoon. Mayuresh, very calm for the markets today after 4 days of extremely volatile moves. Traders would have liked this.
Not sure about the traders, Pankaj, but clearly I think from an investment perspective, one really needs to understand a lot of dynamics, whether global or domestic, and all cues will be probably affixed with what the finance minister has to probably deliver in the budget. So in my opinion, I think the volatility will continue and we will mirror what the global markets are doing, at least till the budget and in the short term, even after that.
Right. Hero MotoCorp is up 3.5%, 2,700 rupees. You think in such an environment, these sort of companies which deliver 5-10% constant growth will get better valuations or will relatively outperform?
Again, I think the entire theme for two-wheelers specifically having rural area in terms of how their volume growth pans out will depend on how the monsoons will pan out for this season. And clearly after two bad monsoons, the expectations are that this time the monsoons will be quite normal. Having said that, probably I think Hero MotoCorp's 40% sales comes from the rural areas, and again I think the cost optimization program that the management has embarked upon is paying rich dividends. So I think the kind of additional spends that one really expects from new launches by having its tentacles spread across rural areas, I think that might take a little bit of sheen in terms of how the input cost deflation will have a positive rub-off effect on the margins and some amount of rub-down on margins. But again, I think if the monsoons turn out to be better, I think the volume growth can be quite stupendous for rural-based two-wheeler companies. So I think you need to wait and watch and see how the monsoon progresses. From a valuation perspective, I think it is quite fairly valued at this point of time. So I think though we've got an accumulative rating on the stock, my entire thesis would be I think the volume growth would depend on A, how monsoons pan out, and B, I think the continued cost optimization program of the company, which will aid bottom line.
Right, but do you think the budget would also be quite important? The focus on rural, the spending over there would be quite important for this two-wheeler pack?
Generally, I think the budget will be looked upon for in terms of what kind of spending thrust the finance minister gives through, and clearly I think within the spending thrust itself, which areas probably covers, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's more to do in terms of how the rural demand should prop up some more in the hands of the rural economy. I think these are important facets to be watched out for, but he has to do a fine balancing act between how he loosens its strings for growth and probably on the fiscal consolidation part. So I think it's going to be a very important budget in terms of how the trends for investment outlay are laid, specifically in terms of areas of infrastructures, power, rural spending.
Right. As far as the overall budget trade is concerned, what would you go long on? Before the budget. Say if you want to pick up 3-4 names that now that the budget run up would start, what would be the names you would focus on?
No, clearly, I think the government focus, as I mentioned earlier, would be more to do with how the spending thrust goes through, whether in the infrastructure pack, the power pack, the engineering pack, and again the rural discretionary pack. So again, what happens with the pay commission payouts are also going to be important because as along the monsoon, as we discussed earlier. So I think the government focus is going to be on all these factors together. So I think specific stocks within these sectors are expected to do well. The thrust basically on roads, infrastructure, highways is also top of the priority agenda for the government. So I think a lot of the EPC players or the EPC theme in general should do relatively better over FY16 and 17.
Right. As far as the cement pack is concerned, irrespective of the budget, that continues to look good.
No, clearly I think it's entirely a story on how the volume growth will pan out, how demand will come through. And again, I think that is entirely based on the next few months and quarters. Again, I think the government thrust on infrastructure stroke housing has been quite well known, and the government pushes through, possibly not just in this budget, but in the coming budget of the coming few quarters as well in terms of new reforms coming through for these sectors. My entire thesis is that it's a more a play on how volume recovery will happen. Once that probably happens, you're going to see sustained signs of stabilization, realization rates, and that will have an end effect in terms of how their utilization levels pan out, which will again give a very positive effect on the return ratios. So clearly I think larger cement players having a pan-India presence or cement players within a specific area, I think these companies should do well with expectations of volume / demand returning and price stabilization happening in terms of realization.
Right, Mayuresh, just stay on with us. About 90 seconds remaining for market close. Just wanted to point out United Spirits is up 8% right now. We got you the Credit Suisse upgrade that has come in on United Spirits. It's up 8% right now. BHEL down 2%, 101.6. Axis back down 1.5. United Spirits, there you go, is up 7%, 2,424 for USL. It also comes into FNO with effect from the next series, so that could be quite interesting. Tata Steel 1% higher, 253. Bharti Airtel 1.2% higher, 325. Hindalco flat with a positive bias. Tata Power down about 1%. ONGC up 1%. Power Grid up 0.75%. Coal India down about 1.7%. HDFC Limited down about 0.7%. Yes Bank down about 0.7%, Reliance up about 0.5%, Kane India up close to 0.5%, L&T down close, actually absolutely flat for L&T. Adani Ports flat, Infosys absolutely flat, BPCL down about 3%, 764, Tech Mahindra up about 2.4%. Sun Pharma flat with a negative bias, NTPC up about 1.5%, C Entertainment up closer to 0.67%. HCL Tech again absolutely flat, Wipro up 1%. Ambuja Cement down about 0.3, Cipla up about 0.1%. IndusInd Bank 841, Lupin 1782, HDFC Bank again absolutely flat, really no change. Even Nifty, we have the closing bell now, so even Nifty just up 10 points, so there is no major change. But if you look at the day's low, it was 7,150. We opened at that level and we are closing in close to the day's high. That is something which would always be taken in positively. GAIL 324, TCS 2,314. Dr. Reddy's down 1.6 and Bajaj Auto was up 2.3%. Ultratech 1.7% higher, ACC 1.5% higher, Grasim absolutely flat. That's the top gainer. PNB 4.8% higher, 775.95 for that name. Hero MotoCorp 3.3% higher, 2,705, 7.2 million shares traded. SBI up 3%, 165 or closer to 165 for SBI. Bosch up 3%, 16,890 for Bosch, 12,000 in terms of volume. Asian Paints up 2.5%, 856 for Asian Paints, 7.5 lakh shares traded. Tech Mahindra 2.4% up, 1.6 million shares traded for that name. Bajaj Auto up closer to about 2%. Some of the names that made news, let's just pull up Team Leasing, which is the new listing as well. That was a name which was almost down 20% and it recovered everything that it lost out. Team Lease up 2%, it was up 24% from the day's lowest point. Fortis Healthcare was up 11%. United Jet Airways was a part of Stocks in News, up 2.5%. Fortis Healthcare. SRL Diagnostics, that's where they are looking to sell some stake, 174 on that name. United Spirits 6% higher. Credit Suisse upgraded the name. We bought you the upgrade this morning. It was a good upgrade. It was an upgrade after a long time, and maybe that's the reason why it was up 6%. Mayuresh Joshi is still with us. Mayuresh, United Spirits after 30% correction, would you be a buyer?
No, clearly we don't have that under our coverage, but clearly I think the expectations here are that a lot of price hikes might happen across different states post the budget, and if that probably happens, you're seeing volume growth which has been quite reasonable for a lot of these liquor companies actually sustain. And again, I think if that sustenance of volume growth happens with price increases along with fall in input prices, specifically ENA, you're probably looking at margin expansion trickling down to the bottom line. So again, I think it's largely dependent on what kind of price hikes are initiated, and B, I think the kind of premiumization portfolio within the listed liquor stocks, how do they drive the volume growth out there as well, is an equally important, pertinent angle to be looked out for.
Right. As far as United Spirits is concerned, you think the price correction will also fuel up the buzz that Diageo may eventually increase further stake?
So again, I think it's highly speculative at this point of time, but again, I think Diageo will try to push through a lot of his products, and I think that's what the strategy in the longer run would be. But clearly, I think at this point of time, in our opinion at least, and though this is not a buy or sell recommendation, I think the general point that we're trying to drive is that USL might probably be looking at profitability at this point of time rather than volume growth, at least over the next 2 to 3 quarters. So again, I think that is one balance sheet strength that they would like to build upon rather than pushing volumes at this point of time.
Right. As far as a name like Fortis Healthcare, where there is that option value that SRL Diagnostic may get actually divested, or they may raise funds via selling stake over there, It's a company, or rather Dr. Lal Path Labs have done very well. So do you think it could be an interesting development if it happens?
Well, yes, I think if it happens, I think it just is a value unlock process. And clearly, I think with the kind of spread that SRL has, I think it's quite evident that if this does go through, I think it's going to have a positive rub-off effect. Fortis is trying to probably look at even its core business of hospitals to increase the bed strength. I think they have lowered down or deleveraged their balances significantly over the last 2 to 3 years. So I think they're doing the right steps. So I think one needs to identify and understand what kind of valuations, if they are really looking at divesting the stake, comes through. Again, I think if it does happen, and the whole point is if, I think that should be a positive development for the company.
Right. The traditional names like Sun Pharma, Lupin, maybe even Infosys, Tech Mahindra would do better in such an environment where rupee is depreciating. They are big exporters, plus their earnings have better predictability irrespective of the macro growth.
So again, defensives normally do well in volatile times, and again I think the markets look out for stocks within these defensive sectors where the earnings visibility looks quite stable in times which are highly uncertain, both domestic and global. So clearly I think pharma, IT would stand right there at the top in terms of how the earnings would pan out. Again, I think one really needs to be stock specific within these sectors, probably look at the kind of FDA concerns that the pharma sector has in the medium term that we've probably seen over the last few months and quarters. And again, I think IT traditionally, Q3, Q4 are expected to be weak. So I think what happens post these 2 quarters, how the spending patterns turn out, how the constant currency term growth is expected. I think the rupee depreciation obviously acts as a tailwind for all these companies. But for IT specifically, utilization levels have seen steady improvement. There is still certain scope in stocks like Infosys to see steady growth in their utilization levels inching up northwards. And again, I think constant currency terms, the kind of cash position that they've got, the business verticals that they manage, I think client mining has been extremely strong. Yes, so I think a stock-specific approach within these 2 sectors is mandated because pharma largely plagued by FDA, and I think a lot of stocks, again, a little bit higher in terms of valuations.
Right, Mayuresh, thank you so much for taking out time for us. Always a pleasure talking to you. Markets have shut. We have the adjusted closing, 7,210.